Good evening, everybody, as you guys are logging in. We're going to give folks just a couple more minutes because we were a couple minutes late starting. So I can see the numbers going up. Folks are logging in right now. And then we will get going. Just give us 1 or 2 more minutes.
I think I got it.
Hey, everybody. Just quickly, my name is Ann Jerzyk. I'm the Director of Outreach and Advocacy, and thank you so much for coming and joining our webinar tonight. People sometimes will say, why do you host these webinars? And my job is to ask people to advocate on issues, and particularly water quality issues as they impact the Chesapeake Bay. But generally, people don't want to advocate for things that they don't understand. So we wanted to spend some time tonight to go over toxic pavement sealants and why we think they're dangerous, both to human health as well as to aquatic resources. And we have 2 great speakers tonight who are going to walk us through that. The only housekeeping that I have for you is we are recording the webinar. We will post it up to our website. Generally, it takes us a couple days to get it up, and I'll send an email out with a link to the recording. And the way that you ask questions is you just go to the Q&A section. You'll just type your questions in there. Both the panelists can see those, and they can either type an answer to them or we can answer those live. So yeah, without further ado, okay, so our first speaker tonight is Tom Ennis. Let me just pull up this very quickly. So Tom's an engineer. I love this, actually. He's an engineer, an author, and agent of change for over 30 years. He's got combined experience in private and public sectors in 20 states and several foreign countries. And in 2020, he won the Texas Sustainability Practices Award from the American Public Works Association. He is the founder of Coal Tar Free America, which has assisted over 100 units of governments and has led to the ban of toxic coal tar sealers for more than 45 million Americans. So making the area safer for all of us. So Tom, I'll let you take it away.
Great, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here virtually. And we're going to start with a few poll questions.
Okay.
If you've ever used a driveway sealant, you know what was in the product you used. Should I ask the second question, or do you want to wait till those
we'll give
filter through?
Yeah, I'm watching the responses come in. So let's give folks a couple seconds to think about this. Okay, one more. Okay, gonna scroll down just a little bit.
All right, very interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, so you see, half of you have never sealed a driveway, so we'll be talking about some of those details. If you don't know, you're in good company. Most people don't know what either they used or what a commercial applicant has put on their driveway. And go ahead, next question. Are you situationally aware of circumstances where you're exposed to secondhand smoke? So for instance, where I work, sometimes there's a cluster of smokers as you walk in the entrance. Are you aware of those kind of places you encounter?
Yeah, it looks like 8 out of 10 said yes.
Okay, let's go to the third question then. We can
Okay.
scroll it. Do I need to scroll that down or is
Nope, it's down.
Okay. There we go. So are you situated about places where you're exposed to toxic pavements? And reason I'm asking that question and these two questions back to back, because the risk profile is the same. Cancer risk profile of secondhand smoke versus being around toxic pavement sealants is very similar. So we have a habit of being aware of secondhand smoke, but we're not aware of pavement sealants. And perhaps after we finish this presentation, you'll have a better sense for your own health, where you might encounter it, where you may not. Right, so we'll get into the presentation now. Joe, next slide, please. Okay, so what do you see when you see this? This is a Rachel Carson quote there. This town in the heart of America where all seem to be in harmony with its surroundings. It's a nice view. Next slide, please. But do you see a child surrounded by toxins and carcinogens? That's what I do when I see that. Next slide. How about, do you see an inhalation hazard for this child that can last up to 8 years after the seal coat's put down? Next slide. How about an ingestion hazard? One toxicologist said, when one hand-to-mouth motion for a child on a toxic seal coat, it represents a significant toxic exposure. Next slide. How about skin exposure? Do you recognize that child, just by putting their hand there, PAHs, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, are passing into their bloodstream? Maybe not, but that's what I see when I look at that. Next slide, please. Seal coats typically sprayed commercially. Next slide. Oftentimes it can be used in a bucket. So you see here buckets that could be purchased at a home improvement store. And this illustrates a common question I get. What about which one's better? You can see these are all the same manufacturer, and those are all just different warranties of the same base product. And the more money you put into a product, the longer it lasts. So these are just typical 5-gallon buckets. Next slide. You can see this wear pattern beginning on the pavement. You see where it's beginning to gray. That shows you that the seal coat's beginning to wear off. So you may not be aware of some of those places you go to. If you see this pattern, it shows you that the parking lot has been sealed in the past, and some product, whether it's toxic or not, is leaving, and it's in the air, it's in the water, it's in the soil surrounding the parking lot, and it may be on the buildings as well. Next slide. And this is what comes off. It's this little dust. And when we took this picture, or actually I took this picture of a buddy of mine doing that, we didn't realize that he was representing a toxic exposure. We didn't realize it would soak in through your skin when we did this, but now we know. Next slide. And this, under a black light, your skin actually glows when you've been exposed to PAHs. And I've actually got a video online that demonstrates that. Pretty scary to watch your hands glow, which under normal light conditions, it looks perfectly fine. Next slide. And why are we concerned about PAHs? And I'll get into what those are, and coal tar sealant. Well, this is a complicated graph here, but all I can tell you is when it's in the red zone there, that's demonstrating that it's a significant, by EPA levels, a significant toxic exposure. So when we say there's thousands of chemicals out there, why are we concerned about this one? If it's in that threshold, that tells us we need to be concerned about it. Next slide. This is a little bit of my bio, and you can see, fourth bullet down, my family worked with coal tar in the roofing business for 4 generations. So I'm not poking at an industry that I'm not, actually put bread on the table for my family for years. So but now we're smarter. We know some things we didn't know before. Next slide. We already asked that poll, so we'll go on to the next one. It's been in the headlines a few places, and it's easy to miss, but Reader's Digest, believe it or not, at one time was one of the highest circulating magazines in the country. USA Today did a whole story, Chicago Sun-Times, etc. Nowadays, Sun-Times means it's part of their syndicate, and it can be all over the country. Next slide. So what are PAHs? Polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. You break it down, poly means many, cyclics, it's rounded. Aromatic, actually, it's when these chemicals were family of chemicals were first discovered, they had a strong scent, and so that's why they're called aromatics. Some do have a scent, some don't. Some people with a little bit of training, you can smell a coal tar parking lot a block away as it's being put down because the odor is so strong. Hydrocarbons, as we know, have hydrogen and carbon, and most of these in this family of chemicals are carcinogenic, toxic, and mutagenic means it's caused mutagenicity at a cellular level. Next slide. Here's some shapes of these. It's like bathroom tiles all put together, and there's all different hundreds of these, but these are common ones. Naphthalene, if you know mothballs, that's commonly understood as one of the most things you're around the most. But also, anytime you burn something, a hydrocarbon, you burn your toast, you'll have PAHs, but not in the same quantity. Next slide. So this gives you a sense of why are we concerned about pavement sealants and not all these other sources? Well, we look at these typical levels on their single digits, 2 digits, and we're looking at coal tar there at 70,000 parts per million. That's a massive amount. And every researcher that I've encountered, when they first find out that the levels are that high, they think there's a lab error because it's unbelievable that is out in the public, but it is. Next slide. And they're a complicated product that uses, it's an emulsion, like butter, mayonnaise is an emulsion, etc. in your home. But anyway, it uses several different ingredients, but coal tar being or asphalt are the primary ingredients. Next slide. Lots of confusing terminology. Especially if you get a contractor, they have all kinds of regional different terms. And now, especially since people want to ban it or are concerned about it, you're going to have even more confusion. So people use a variety of things. Next slide. But the easy thing, just like myself, people call, one of my Tom, my brothers used to call me Tom the Atom Bomb. Some folks in Texas call me T-Dog, but it's like my social security number. That doesn't change what you call me. Just like that, seeing these chemicals doesn't matter what you call them. The CAS number, as we refer to them, doesn't change. Next slide. And here's from the Asphalt Paving Association, basically saying there's really no good reason to use this product, and they believe either. So strange that even asphalt people aren't big fans of this product. Next slide. Already asked that question. Here's something, I put this together. The primary researchers that started all this with the U.S. Geological Survey have both since passed away through a car accident. So I put this summary table or chart as an homage to their work with the city of Austin starting in 2005. The next, we won't get to the next slide just yet, but these are the key things if you want to spend some time with this slide later and learn some more. And there are links to all these points. Let's say it's a nationwide problem. That was USGS went to 40 lakes around the country and sampled. Cancer risk to workers, or the NIOSH study. These are all things that are well developed, that are these are important landmark studies, but there's also dozens more that I couldn't fit on one page. Well, let's go to the next slide. So if you really want to read this and follow all those links and read lots of research, you can go to the archive.org, search USGS and coal tar, and that image and links will come right up, and it's on a public website, so you can get right to it. Next slide. That NIOSH study that I referred to, even the CDC says the most effective way to deal with the toxicity of this product is to not use it anymore. So it's important. And what's interesting about that, the industry was part of the coal tar industry, was part of this study, but yet they haven't talked about it since the results have come out that were such strong against the use of the product. Next slide. I could go into some more detail, but basically this is recent research, and I get ticks when coal tar research that I've been a part of is quoted by someone. So some Chinese researchers wrote a paper saying, hey, our indoor air quality isn't as bad as America. And why is nasty Chinese air that's bad outside, bad inside, but the dust in American homes with next to coal tar sealant is worse than an industrial city in China. That gives you a sense of how bad this is. Next slide. The AMA supports the cessation of the use of this product as well. And they had like a formal resolution to say that. Next slide. People, you can study this some. People always ask me about, what about the EPA? EPA has done a lot of things. They've sponsored seminars. They approve the use of this product. They have brochures, and they also, some of their own studies have suggested the most appropriate action is to ban it, but yet still continues. So what are the, so the EPA is kind of all over the place with regard to this topic. Next slide. I keep a map just to give you a sense of what's going on around Virginia. Maryland has a statewide ban. Pittsburgh's got a whole lot of bans there. New York has a ban. There is work in Connecticut and Massachusetts. And then to the south, you've got Charlotte, North Carolina has a ban, a very active group, and some conversation about a statewide ban to your south. And then Greenville, South Carolina, and Columbia both have bans. So that gives you some sense of what's happening in your neck of the woods. Next slide. And I did a search of, this is a Google, pardon, small print there, but this is from public databases of coal tar sealed public sites in Virginia that I could find through the internet. And as I looked at some of the Google Earth images, you folks have a lot of seal coat in Virginia, and a good likelihood that it's probably coal tar. So you have a problem. Next slide. Could a ban pass in Virginia? This is my strategy, or this is my expert analysis of what it takes. It takes a whole lot of things, and it would take, we see 10 people on the call. There'll be more people that watch this afterwards, but it really requires a level of citizen discontent to get this done. The science is there. We'll probably get a sponsor. The industry will oppose it, but what will the citizen activism make a difference? It's a question mark. Next slide. And that's it for me. Joe.
Thanks, Tom. Let me grab my slides here. Give me a second.
Yeah, well, Joe's doing that. Let me just quick tell you a little bit about my colleague. So Dr. Joe Wood is CBF senior scientist. He's been with CBF since 2014. He got his PhD in life sciences from VCU. He's published many peer-reviewed journal articles on harmful algal blooms and nutrient loading and stream restoration. And he lives with his wife, Elizabeth, and his son, Isley, in Richmond, Virginia. So Joe, I'll let you take it away. And your slides look great. We can see them perfectly.
Great, thanks. So really appreciate a chance to talk about this this evening, and thank you all for being here. I think this is one of the issues that hits home with me, a lot of people, because it's talking about, like, you know, the health of kids, the health of your family, and it's right outside so many people's door. And so Tom, you know, with his work in Austin, has been around this stuff all over the country. And I'm going to shift to talking about Virginia, you know, what we know, where we've been, and just try to give you a little bit more evidence to move forward with. Okay, so just a basic outline of where we've been in terms of intent to kind of reduce the amount of use of this product. In 2018, a delegate introduced this legislation. The delegate ended up pulling the bill, actually, so it never actually made it to committee, but they sent a letter to DEQ to request a study of this, you know, at least a review of the literature to see what they found out. And so there's a report. I'll talk a little bit about that later. In 2022, Delegate Tran brought a local option bill, which essentially it was saying that local governments, if they'd like to, have the option to ban this. In Virginia, we have to grant authority to local governments to be able to do something like that. And it was just a local option to let local governments prohibit these substances. It died in the subcommittee. Last year, same bill came back. It made it out of the subcommittee, made it to the House floor. It made it out of the committee, but it died on the House floor, which is really disappointing. And so, you know, again, this is going to come back this year. It's likely going to be a statewide ban instead of a local option. We've heard some feedback that the idea of a local option might actually be more problematic. The thought was going with that was that it was a lesser bar to try to get to first, but there's some concerns about what that creates. So I think this year a statewide ban is going to be on the table. And so I'm going to talk about what are the implications of that? What does that mean for what does it mean for the Bay? What does it mean for aquatic resources? What does it mean for some other things as well? So I'm going to start here just by referencing back to the first time a ban happened. And this is some work that Tom was involved with, but in 2006, Austin became the first city to ban this. And the question for you all that Anne's going to pull up in a poll here is 8 years later, they went and they measured toxics in a lake that basically was in a watershed, you know, received waters from this area. And the question is, you know, what percentage of PAH decline was there over the course of 8 years? So I'll give you a second to ponder that before moving forward. So you are wise test takers. We can go ahead and end the poll. D is the correct answer, 60%, which is really quite a remarkable feat to me to think about, you know, a policy action happening, being implemented, and then just 8 years later, you know, just this drastic cut in pollutants in waterways. You know, so that's just a tremendous accomplishment, and that was for one city. What would be on the table this year at the legislature would be essentially prohibiting this product all across Virginia, which could have some profound effects both for human health and for wildlife. I'm not going to spend too much time talking. This is a paper where that was cited, by the way, in case anyone's interested in it. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about human health. Tom talked about this, but I do just want to like stop on this for a second and point out this what you're seeing here. This is from the United States Geologic Survey. This is a federal government expert water scientist, right? This is not just like one academic study. Their review suggested that, like, you know, if you live near this stuff, 38 times higher risk of cancer. I mean, that's just an incredible public health risk that is jarring to almost every person I have ever seen read that. that say, if I use this product on my driveway, my kids are at way higher risk of cancer. I mean, it's just an incredibly problematic thing that should be jarring. But so take that, there are human health implications related to this product. I'm going to move on to aquatic life implications as well. So I'm going to kind of walk through some of the big ones for the bay. The first is oysters. We know that PAHs are problematic for oysters, and PAHs and these products, these driveway sealants, are not synonymous, but some of these products contain 50% PAHs by weight. So they are an incredible source of PAHs. And so this study from Morgan State basically demonstrated that the reproductive cycle of oysters is threatened by PAHs. We know for a fact that PAHs are highly problematic for oysters, which is something that we spend a lot of time working on, a lot of time trying to protect. Okay, so definitely bad for oysters from this local study. Fish. So in the Potomac River there and the Anacostia, there's been a lot of work studying tumors in catfish. And there are clear indications that when you have high levels of PAHs, they initiate tumors. They initiate significant mutations in catfish and other types of fisheries. Like, very clear evidence of that. None of that is really even questionable. This is from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The federal government is saying these things. Down in the Elizabeth River, we have had a lot of PAH contamination there, not always just from driveway sealants, but this is a study from Elizabeth River Project and BIMS from several years ago, but it showed instances where if you compare, they had these sites that had, they were Superfund sites with high levels of PAHs, and there was an effort to essentially cap the pollution, to cap it in place and dramatically reduce it. And what they saw has always been astounding to me was a dramatic decrease in fish cancer. Where in the situation where fish are exposed to high levels of PAH, they develop cancer, and that's observable. The PAHs go away and the cancer drops pretty dramatically. So it's not it's a very clear demonstration of a link between fish cancer and these pollutants that's driving it. So freshwater mussels, this is something near and dear to my heart. If you're not familiar with freshwater mussels, this is the most endangered class of organisms in the country. And this paper is from the Clinch River in southwestern Virginia, which is outside the Bay watershed, but it's a gem of the state. It's one of the most biodiverse rivers in the world. It's incredible biodiversity here. And this study from just 2 years ago demonstrated that PAHs are a significant concern for these freshwater mussels. They cause significant problems for these vulnerable species that are a really incredible source of biodiversity. So freshwater mussels, another class of aquatic organisms that are highly vulnerable to PAHs. Aquatic life is severely degraded by PAHs. It's clear. There's really no question about that. And the products that we are talking about, as Tom showed, are an incredible source of those pollutants. So I want to move now to some of the stuff that we've heard over the past few years about this issue. We've been trying to communicate to lawmakers over the past few years about this issue and help people understand it. I'd say my general impression is that very few people know about this issue. Just talking to people on the street or whatever, I very rarely talk to people that are familiar with this issue. So that's a really important point. It's just showing people the work that's been done on this stuff and letting them react to it. So in 2018, this came from that very first bill. The Department of Environmental Quality put together essentially a review of impacts related to coal tar sealants. And this study has, in some ways, caused some problems because I've heard many places where this study is cited as a demonstration that, well, Virginia doesn't have issues related to this. They in this report that they put together, they weren't able to document any instances where we have problems related to coal tar sealants, or where we have water quality impairments associated with this stuff, or fish that have died as a result of it. And I think that's really a very stark misinterpretation of what's in that report, and I'm going to try to explain why. The main reason is that DEQ doesn't actually study these things. The DEQ does not monitor PAHs, and definitely does not monitor coal tar sealant. So it wasn't a fact of like they went and looked for something and they didn't find it. It was just they don't have resources to look for these types of things, and that's very clear in the report. And you know, in addition to that, the report did not come across and say, you know, these things are not problematic. It had very clear findings suggesting that these have significant issues for aquatic life. These problems are one of the biggest sources of this type of pollution east of the Mississippi. And so, you know, I just would put it to you, if you get a response from someone that, you know, oh, but DEQ hasn't found any problems with this, you go look at that report and you can see like that is not the case. You know, they don't have data on it, sure. But like we've talked about, you know, many studies from the federal government, from peer review academics all over the country, all over the world, frankly, that have demonstrated these issues. So that report of not finding something is really not something to hang your hat on as these not being a problem. Okay, so, you know, one question I think is relevant out there is like, are these things used in our area? And I think it's a hard thing to ask. Anecdotally, I will tell you that, you know, I've called around to a lot of places just to ask, like, do you have this product or not? And, you know, I just did this week, and I called, you know, about 10 people in Richmond just to say, like, you know, I'm looking for a driveway sealant. Do you have a product, and is it a coal tar sealant? And, you know, 7, yes, coal tar sealant is what we use. You know, many of these were exclusive. Yeah, that's all we use. That's the best product that we have is coal tar sealant. 2 of them they weren't sure what they used. So, you know, who knows with that. And then the last one didn't use coal tar sealant. So my main point here is that, like, you know, this is not like an off, you know, brand, like very rarely used product. This is, from my experience in asking around about it, it is very commonly used. It might be less to some extent in Northern Virginia, and that may be because DC and Maryland have banned this and there's some contractors up there. My understanding is it's a little bit less prevalent up there as a result of that. But I would encourage you, you know, call your local guy to see what they're using, because, you know, in my experience, there's a lot of it out there. So it's definitely around. This slide, I must have gotten it out of order, but this was directly from the DEQ study that I just mentioned, just highlighting language here, how DEQ, you know, when they did their review, they had plenty of things in here that said, you know, these products are highly problematic. Again, at the top, you know, they're one of the main sources east of the Mississippi. And I'm sorry, I forgot to mention this point. One of the things that they clearly demonstrated in the report is that they don't have monitoring for this. And in fact, that they used to monitor in fish tissues for this type of stuff, but they found that that wasn't a good method. And basically they discontinued that program 20 years ago. So again, that's not like that's not a report that someone can point to and say, we don't have problems in Virginia related to this issue. So other points about use in Virginia, VDOT. VDOT does not use this product because they think it's problematic, because it's toxic. You know, if VDOT is not using this product on highways, why is it good enough for your kid to sit and draw with chalk on? Big box stores do not sell these products because of concerns about liability. And we have alternatives that are equally cost. So again, like, why are they good enough for your driveway where you have exposure and you get dust into your house? So I'm gonna end on this question, and then we can kind of take any questions that you guys have. And you know, it might be, I hope you get the answer right, but the last question is, coal tar sealants are harmful to which of the following? Human health, oysters, fisheries, freshwater mussels, or all of the above? And while you're submitting those answers, I'll just take a second to say, of the environmental issues that I've worked on, this has some of the most unequivocal evidence of public health and environmental damages. And it's so easy. The solution is so easy. You know, all we have to do is switch to a product that costs basically the same price anyways, and we'll have these benefits. You know, this is not a hard decision for moving forward. This is very common sense to prohibit these products. Okay, I'm glad everybody got the right answer to all the above. And just point being, you know, these things have implications, negative implications for lots of different parts of Virginia that we hope to protect. So I'm going to stop there. We can move to questions or discussion, and I'll kick it back to you, Anne, to moderate that.
Thanks, Joe. And Tom, if you can just come back on screen quickly, that'd be great. I think you guys can both see the questions, and Tom's already answered one of them. But Joe, I think I'd like for you to weigh in on this as well. So Sue is one of our clean water captains in Norfolk, and she says, what sectors and organizations oppose this ban restriction if the evidence is so clear? And Tom answered unions, Chamber of Commerce, steel industry, and sometimes even Association of School Principals, which I find appalling. But in Virginia specifically, we probably want to talk about the Manufacturers Association because they've been the ones who have mostly testified against it.
Yes. So in the I guess 3 or 4 years that this bill has been active, the Virginia Manufacturers Association, I think, is the only group that has ever stood up in a committee and said we're opposed to this. We can show you what they said exactly. Not sure I can quickly rationalize their argument. So yeah, I've also heard that there's been someone from the sealant agency that's talked to some legislators, but those are the only 2 that I'm aware of that have spoken out on this. There are several that have spoken in support of it, but.
And to Joe's point, I made a fun video mocking their testimony a few years ago. So it's on YouTube. If I found it real quick, I could put it in the chat, but that might be a distraction. But maybe we can send it along somewhere else. But anyway, my experience is say anything, do anything, whatever is necessary to continue using this product. It's not rational. It's not science. It's hocus pocus, whatever. And it makes me want to wish they had to swear in to be an expert witness, but that is not the case in most agencies, most state governments.
So there are 2 questions really, but that Sue and John Reeves both ask, which is, A, are there cost-effective alternatives? That's the first question. And the second one is, this add-on to that is, are there any concerns about any of the alternative products?
Well, I'll take it, Joe, since I've been swimming in this a while. There are alternatives. That's why part of the big box store's recipe for that decision making is there a toxic product, but also is there a suitable substitute? And so with a similar price and a similar performance. So that's why Home Depot and Lowe's and now every retailer around the country has made that same decision based upon that. So I think then there's more evidence with other larger applicators, but in general, same price, same performance, etc. Maybe some slight nuance on coal tar is actually fuel resistant for gasoline spills, but typically you don't spill gasoline on your driveway or your parking lot. And today's vehicles don't drip hydrocarbons like they used to. So it's not as important as it perhaps was.
So I'll just add one thing about alternatives, particularly on the PAH issue, and this follows the model of how Maryland passed their legislation. But my understanding is rather than having a qualitative tag on the prohibition, that the prohibition would actually be on the toxic percentage of material, the amount of toxic chemical that is in the material, because there are lots of probably ways to blend these, and there could be many that have varying toxicity. And so I think the legislation this year will likely contain that quantitative metric associated with it.
Right, because there are some asphalt-based products that they super cook and it elevates the PAH values of those products almost as high as coal tar. And that's why the newer regulations are regulating a percentage and to make sure we don't backslide in environmental or public health issues.
Yeah, Joe, I just saw your note. So could you guys speak to some alternatives? Like if you went to a big box store now, what would you get as a driveway sealant?
There are several products depending on your big box store. You know, as they normally do, they have a big buyer's agreement. So you've got probably half a dozen manufacturers of residential driveway sealer, and they'll have a product line, meaning cheap, less, you know, medium cost and expensive at most big box stores. So you can just pick whatever your pocketbook. If you want to only do it once every 10 years or every other year, you don't care. You can buy the cheap stuff. But and I think one of the questions we didn't ask, are there other problems in any of these products? Potentially, but I would say nowhere near that. I mean, there are these polymers that are added that at some level may be a concern someday, but their toxicity is nothing close to what we're talking about with the PAHs themselves. So if we take care of that and take care of all, we've got, it's probably be way down on the list of environmental concerns.
Yeah, I think that one of the things about that question about are there concerns with the other alternatives that's so important is the magnitude of effect. I mean, I would just say the Bay Foundation and lots of, you know, conservation groups and other groups work on issues with much, much smaller effects than a 38-fold increase in cancer rates. Like that is just an incredible risk to mitigate, and taking care of that, like, yeah, there could be negative side effects with lots of products, but that level is just super important to address.
We did the comparison once to say, if you use a non-toxic product, if it wore off every day and you reapplied it every day, which is ridiculous, that toxicity would be nowhere near as bad as putting a coal tar sealant down on your driveway. So no one would do that. And I'm not saying the products last only a day, but if you did, you'd still be ahead toxicity wise by doing that.
So one of the questions is, has there been any research on interactions between sealants on parking lots and COVID? For example, around care homes that experienced a high rate of mortality.
No,
That's a
that's a
good research
COVID
problem.
question. I haven't. Well, the kind of research that has been done, that of course, you know, as we know, there's only been 3 confirmed cancer clusters before in the history of the United States, and you know they've made movies out of most of them. And the third one, Tom's River, New Jersey, which is Danny DeVito is making one. It's supposed to be coming out soon. And there's the fourth is in Taylorville, Illinois, where they excavated an old coal tar manufacturing plant, and lots of kids got brain cancer as a result of that. And so those are what we know, and those have to be so statistically so clearly defined to really make any significant analysis. For instance, the toxicologist that's worked on this, he said, you know, by looking at the data, he says, I know there's kids out there today who have cancer today from pavement sealants, but can you say it's that child or that child? No, you can't. And so probably in a similar sense, if you know, I guess in some respects, trying to link COVID with that, I think the hard part about it is, well, in some respects, since coal tar is actually used as a antibacterial agent, things on the surface would die. That's why you put a coal tar cousin on telephone poles so bugs don't eat it. So if you had coal tar on your parking lot, you probably have less germs on your parking lot. So in some respects, at least on that micro layer, there'd be less COVID on the surface, but that's not the way you ask the question. It might actually be the other way around. But you're going to have cancer instead of dying from COVID, I guess, would be the other way of looking at it. Terrible as that is, for sure.
All right, which one of you wants to tackle John Reeves' question about the QC assay of PAHs? Hear me read it?
Oh, sure, I can read it. Or, yeah, I can. We did a bunch of that stuff.
You want to read that
testing.
question for everybody so everybody
Sure.
can hear it?
QC of PAHs, concern on cost of assays, and kind of like PFAS, which group thousands of CMPSs. Okay, I'm not sure about the CMPSs, but compounds, sorry. Essentially, everybody regulates the 16 primary PAHs. So that's what we test for. 16 primary PAHs. The world has recognized that those 16, even though there's hundreds, those 16 represent generally what's happening. It's not the full complete picture, as we know. If you're interested, I worked with National Mag Lab out of University of Florida in Tallahassee that has a device that basically we looked at every PAH, had the ability with a super duper magnetic analysis to look at every PAH. But the fact of the matter is, coal tar sealant under that analysis was toxic, and under the 16 PAHs, it's still toxic. So all the regulatory bodies use the 16 primary PAHs as a regulatory threshold. EPA does the same thing. Europe does the same thing. Joe, I don't know if you'd want to add anything to
that. No, that makes sense. That's my perspective. So I can take the one about the swing votes. I just saw pop up anyways. I don't know about where Delegate Quilt's official position came back last year. I guess what I would say about swing votes is that like the whole General Assembly is up in the air right now, and there are so many legislators that have are new this year. Like either way, who wins in November, that communicating to them is going to be really important. Because again, this is not an issue that most people are aware of. If it was, I don't think we would be talking about it. Because I think you talk to most people about this and they agree with you immediately because it's so obvious. So we may get a better handle on that eventually. Certainly people on the right committees, but we certainly need to communicate these issues, and it's helpful certainly for grassroots to communicate these issues too, for you guys to help weigh in on this.
Yeah, for those.
Sorry,
go ahead. I was just going to say, for those of you in Virginia, this bill generally comes before the Chesapeake subcommittee. It usually meets 4 o'clock on Tuesdays. Jeremy, am I right? It's 11 people on the committee. So, and it'll change a little bit, right? Delegate Wilt's on it, Bloxham's on it, Bulliva's on it, Graves was on it, but there's it's not that many people. And of course, bills in Virginia, they have to get out of subcommittee before they'll go to the full House Ag Committee. And then they got to get out of that full committee before they go to the floor. We were, usually the hardest hurdle is that subcommittee. And I got to tell you, when this passed out of subcommittee last year, I was doing the happy dance in the Richmond office. And I won't duplicate that now because I don't want to embarrass myself in perpetuity. But just say we were, just jumping for joy. It was very sad when the vote came in and it was killed on the floor. I think that what happened was the patrons bill got caught up in a war of words on the floor. It really was not people taking necessarily a position. There was a little bit of punishment happening because of something that she had said earlier. And that's really, really unfortunate because this is a health issue. You do not want your children playing on these parking lots. You do not want, if you're grandparents, you don't want your grandchildren out there. So, I would ask you to appeal to their to their human side and just say, this is not something that you want any child or grandchild of yours to be near. So John asked, what states are working on or are ahead of Virginia that we should emulate? Joe, it looks like that you're working on typing an answer to that one.
Yes, I just put in the chat, I think the link came through, that Maryland just accomplished this just with it, I think it was last year, and has a strong bill that hits that target of toxicity rather than just a name of a class of class of contaminants. And that's a model for us to move forward.
Yeah, I think the one thing that Maryland has that you don't, they had a bunch of fifth graders studying this. Did you see that, Joe, by chance? These fifth graders did it as their class project, and then they were so convinced they presented to Howard County, Maryland, and they passed a ban based upon these kids' recommendation. And then these kids testified multiple times as it went through the state legislature. So in some ways, it was a children's crusade, kind of, in Maryland, which is fun to see because they saw, who gets to see an issue as you learn about it in school. You actually get to advocate and see the change happen. It's pretty rare opportunity for these kids.
Man, light bulb moment. We may steal that idea.
And I've asked. One thing. Go ahead.
I was just going to say one thing that I actually don't think we mentioned tonight was that kids are the most vulnerable. That the public health exposure mechanism that's described is you get dust in your house that's contaminated with this. It's shown in the USDS study, you have dust 25 times higher toxic contaminants, and the little kids put their hands in their mouths, so they get a much higher dust load than anybody else. And
plus their biology makes them more susceptible too. So they're getting a more dose. In that first 5 years, your biology makes you more susceptible to maybe as much as the balance of the next 70 years of exposure. Those first 5 years matter. I think the other thing that's fascinating about this, the research out of Columbia University in New York, they looked at health outcomes of pregnant women exposed to PAHs, and it wasn't from seal coat, but urban PAHs. The ones that had more pH exposure had decreased head size. Ultimately, they followed these kids up to like 14, 16 years old now, lower IQ, more behavior problems, all correlated to PAH exposure. And so we talk about environmental justice. This is an environmental justice issue, and it's unfortunately some people don't get to choose what goes on the parking lot where they live. Some people just have to live with wherever they can afford, and it may or may not be coated in coal tar. The other aspect of what we're talking about, when Virginia says we don't have any water quality metrics for looking at coal tar sealants, excuse me, coal tar is by and large hydrophobic, so it's not going to be in the water column. So you're looking in the water column, say, hey, it's not here. Well, it's going to be in the sediment. So you may have a sediment issue that affects aquatic species, but you could have contaminated sediment, but if you're just looking in the water column, you're never going to find it. So that's one of those things the industry is famous for doing. It's like, look at all these water quality tests. There's no PAHs listed there. Well, yeah, that's because they bind to sediment and settle out in there, and that's where they affect the ecosystem, especially like a bottom feeder, like mussels and shells and oysters.
All right, it looks like we've answered everybody's questions. Oh, Gabby's got one more. Let's see. If a driveway is already coated with coal tar sealant, will resealing it with a product doesn't contain PAHs seal those toxins in to reduce exposure for children? It's a good question, Gabby.
It is, and it's actually one I get a lot because I get calls from people all over the country that's sort of like the oh crap moment. I realize I have coal tar on my driveway, I've got kids, etc. I've recommended people put, you know, it's it's a it's an economic decision, quite honestly, because if you could afford to get rid of it and it's expensive, pay the money and get rid of it for the health of your family. If you can't, unfortunately, I've known people who put a coat of a non-toxic seal coat, and within a matter of weeks on their driveway, that those odors start permeating through. So if the odors are coming through, so are the toxins and everything else. So it's a problem. In Austin, we developed a technique to remove it for people who violated our ban. Charlotte's using the same technique. It's shot blasting. It's basically grinds off the top surface, and you can do that with HEPA filtration, so it's not a disaster air quality wise. But it's expensive too, so it's a, you know, it's very much an economic problem, and that's, you know, you get calls from people who don't have the means. I know people who live in apartment complexes, they've just, the easiest way to do it is just get out of your lease and move on, find a place that doesn't have it. That's, and if you're but if that answers your question, it's expensive. I wish we had a cheaper way of addressing it, and I wish a seal coat over the top worked, but it doesn't necessarily.
All right, that was a great question, Gabby. Thank you. Looks like we're done with questions, guys. I just want to say thanks to everybody for attending. Share this information with your friends. When we send out the link to the recording, I'll be sure to send two things with it. One will be a fact sheet about this, just to capture some of the information. We'll also send Tom slides because you've got all the links in that particular slide. That'd be really helpful if people want to click on those to study further. And then lastly, we did do an action alert to just so that with one click, you can send a note to your legislator saying that you believe that we should ban these toxic pavement sealants in Virginia. So be on the lookout for those. It usually takes us a couple of days to send it out. So thank you. And I'll let everybody go and see, you know, how the baseball game is going to end up. Yeah, go Phillies. All right, guys, take care and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.